Hey there, and welcome back to another journey through time. Tonight, we're going to explore something that'll make you incredibly thankful for that refrigerator humming quietly in your kitchen right now. We're diving deep into medieval food preservation, and believe me, it's going to be quite a journey. Picture those romantic castle feasts and noble banquets you've seen in movies, with their elaborate presentations and seemingly endless variety. Well, let's just say the reality of keeping food edible back then was far less glamorous than Hollywood would have you believe.
If you're enjoying these historical adventures, I'd absolutely love a like or subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more of these deep dives into the past. I'm always fascinated to know where you're all tuning in from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. It never fails to amaze me how people are drifting off to these stories all around the globe. Someone's listening in Australia while it's morning there, while someone else is falling asleep in Canada as snow falls outside their window.
Before we begin our journey, I want you to find that perfect, comfortable position. Maybe you're already in bed. Maybe you're on a couch. Maybe you're in a chair that reclines just right. Wherever you are, take a moment to adjust yourself. Pull up that blanket, fluff that pillow, and make sure your arms and legs are positioned in a way that feels natural and relaxed.
Now take a nice deep breath in through your nose, filling your lungs completely, and then out through your mouth, letting all the tension from the day just flow away with that exhale. Do that one more time. Deep breath in and slowly out, feeling your body beginning to settle and relax.
We're about to travel back to the year 1200, somewhere in the English countryside. And trust me, you're going to feel incredibly grateful for that modern kitchen, that reliable refrigerator, and all those invisible systems that keep your food fresh and safe by the time we're finished with tonight's story.
Awakening in medieval England. So congratulations, you've just awakened in medieval England. It's early morning, probably around dawn, because that's when most people woke up in a world without electric lights. The first sensation that strikes you isn't what you see or hear, it's what you smell. That thick, almost overwhelming mixture of wood smoke from cooking fires, the earthy scent of animals, and something else, something sharp and fermented that seems to coat the inside of your nostrils. It's like someone took every distinctive aroma you've ever encountered, the smell of a farm, the scent of bread baking, the tang of fermented vegetables, and concentrated them all into one small space.
You shift slightly on your straw mattress. And yes, it's literally stuffed with straw, golden wheat stalks that crackle softly as you move, feeling the scratchy, uneven surface beneath you. The rough wool blanket covering you feels nothing like the soft cotton or synthetic fabrics you're accustomed to. This blanket is thick, heavy, and it carries its own distinct odor of sheep and wood smoke, and countless other sleepers who've used it before you, because in medieval times, textiles were precious, and nothing was ever thrown away if it could still provide warmth. Good news, you are alive in medieval England, in an era of incredible human ingenuity and adaptation. Less good news? Well, pretty much everything else is going to be very different from what you're used to, especially when it comes to food and how people manage to keep it edible. Let's start with where you are. If you're a peasant, which statistically you probably would be since about 90% of the population worked the land, you're probably sharing this single room with your entire extended family. And I mean entire. Parents, grandparents, siblings, maybe a few cousins, possibly an aunt or uncle, and perhaps even some family friends who needed a place to stay. Privacy is a concept that simply doesn't exist for common folk. Personal space is a luxury that won't be invented for centuries. The room you're in is maybe 8 feet by 10 feet, and everyone's breathing the same air, sharing the same space, and yes, sharing the same daily challenges of keeping food edible in a world without refrigeration, without preservatives, without any of the modern conveniences that make food storage so simple for us today. Take a moment to let your shoulders drop, releasing any tension you might be holding there. Just let them fall naturally as you imagine this medieval world. The walls around you are made of wattle and daub, basically thin wooden strips woven together like a basket, then covered with a mixture of mud, clay, straw, and sometimes animal dung. Yes, dung, because it was an excellent binding agent and helped make the walls weatherproof. These walls are constantly damp, especially in winter, because there's no central heating, no insulation, no vapor barriers. There's this persistent green mold creeping along the corners that everyone ignores because, well, what choice do they have? You can't exactly call a contractor to fix moisture problems when you're living in the year 1200. Your breathing naturally slows and deepens as you take in this strange, aromatic medieval world, so different from anything you've ever experienced. If you're fortunate enough to be born into the merchant class, and we're talking about maybe 5% of the population here, things are marginally better. You might have your own sleeping area, perhaps even a real wooden bed frame instead of just a straw mattress on the floor. You might have 2 rooms instead of 1, maybe even a separate area for cooking. But better is definitely relative in medieval terms. Your house still has no refrigeration, no preservation methods beyond the most basic techniques, and that modern kitchen you're thinking of, with its running water and electric appliances and spacious counters, it's not really a thing yet. These are the same people who built magnificent cathedrals that still stand today, who created beautiful, illuminated manuscripts, who developed complex systems of agriculture and trade. When it came to food preservation, they applied the same ingenuity and intelligence. They just had to work with the materials and knowledge available to them. Let your breathing continue to slow down, nice and steady, as we explore how these resourceful people managed to feed themselves and their families in a world so different from ours.
The science of salt and meat preservation. Take meat preservation, for example. You know how you can keep fresh meat in your refrigerator for several days, or freeze it for months, or buy it vacuum sealed with a use-by date weeks in the future? Forget all of that entirely. In medieval times, when you slaughtered an animal, and this was usually done in late fall, when the weather was cool enough to slow spoilage, but before winter made outdoor work impossible, you had a very limited window of time before that meat started going bad.
In summer, you might have 6 to 8 hours. In winter, if you were lucky and the weather stayed cold, maybe a day or 2. But that's it. After that, the meat would start developing that telltale smell, that slightly sour odor that meant bacteria were beginning to break down the proteins. A comfortable sigh escapes as you think about how simple it is to just grab fresh meat from your local grocery store, packaged and dated and guaranteed safe.
See, medieval people had developed this elaborate, almost ritualistic system for dealing with fresh meat, and it was called use every single bit immediately or find a way to make it last. When a pig was slaughtered, and pigs were the most common meat animal because they were efficient converters of scraps into protein, the entire community would mobilize. It was like a medieval version of a barn raising,
Except instead of building something, they were racing against time to preserve food. They'd turn that single pig into sausages, bacon, ham, blood pudding, crackling, lard, and about 15 other preparations you've probably never heard of. Every single part of the animal had a use, not because they were being philosophical about waste, but because waste meant starvation. If you threw away edible food, you might not have enough to get through winter.
The most popular and effective method was salt curing, and this was both an art and a science. Picture this scene. You're standing in a cold stone room, probably in the basement of the manor house or the coolest part of a peasant's cottage. The air is thick with the sharp, clean smell of salt, not table salt, but coarse, grayish sea salt that came in large crystals and cost a significant portion of a family's income. Surrounding you are wooden barrels and ceramic crocks filled with chunks of pork floating in brine so salty it would make your mouth pucker just from the smell. The brine isn't just salt water, it's a carefully balanced mixture that might include herbs like thyme or rosemary, spices like peppercorns if the family could afford them, sometimes bay leaves, sometimes juniper berries. Each family had their own recipe, passed down through generations, with small variations that they swore made all the difference.
Your shoulders drop naturally, releasing any tension as you imagine this medieval preservation process, so different from simply putting meat in a freezer. This salt-cured meat would last for months, which was absolutely incredible by medieval standards. You could slaughter a pig in November and still be eating preserved pork from that same animal in March or April. For people living on the edge of subsistence, this was the difference between life and death.
But there were downsides to salt preservation. The meat became incredibly salty, like unimaginably salty by modern standards. Before cooking salt-cured meat, people would have to soak it for hours, sometimes even overnight, changing the water multiple times just to make it edible. And even then, it was tough, chewy, and tasted more like salt than meat. But it was protein, and protein was life. The salt curing process itself was something to behold. First, the fresh meat would be rubbed all over with coarse salt, making sure every surface was covered. Then it would be packed in wooden boxes or barrels with more salt, layer upon layer, until the meat was completely buried. The salt would draw moisture out of the meat. You could actually see the liquid collecting at the bottom of the containers. And as the moisture left, bacteria couldn't survive.
Every few days, someone would check the meat, turning it, adding more salt if needed, removing any pieces that weren't curing properly. It was a constant process that required attention and skill. Too little salt, and the meat would spoil. Too much salt, and it would become inedibly dry and hard. The timing had to be perfect. The salt had to be good quality, and the temperature had to stay cool. Wealthy families could afford to buy salt in large quantities, which meant they could preserve more meat and do it more effectively. Poor families had to be much more careful with their limited salt supplies, sometimes only able to preserve small amounts of meat, just enough to provide flavor for their mostly vegetable-based meals.
Let your breathing continue to deepen as you think about this careful balance between preservation and resources. Smoking was another huge preservation method, and this was where medieval people really showed their ingenuity. They'd build these special smoking houses, not the little home smokers you might be thinking of, but substantial wooden sheds, sometimes as large as small rooms, with carefully designed ventilation systems and multiple levels of racks for hanging meat. The fires in these smoking houses weren't designed to cook the meat, but to produce steady, consistent smoke over weeks or even months. Different woods produced different flavors. Oak was prized for its steady burn and mild flavor. Hickory for its distinctive taste. Fruit woods like apple or cherry for their sweet smoke. People became experts at maintaining these fires, keeping them burning just hot enough to produce smoke, but not so hot that they cooked the meat.
Meat would hang in these smoking houses for weeks, slowly drying out and absorbing smoke until it became this dark, leathery substance that barely resembled fresh food. But it was shelf-stable, it was nutritious, and it could last for months without refrigeration. Smoked meat was so valuable that it was sometimes used as currency. You could trade a side of smoked bacon for tools, cloth, or other necessities. The wealthy had it slightly better because they could afford to build proper smoking houses with good ventilation and temperature control. They could also afford better cuts of meat to smoke, and they could dedicate more time and resources to the smoking process. But even noble families were eating meat that had been hanging in a smoky shed for months. They'd just cover it with expensive imported spices and present it as a delicacy.
Your breathing naturally becomes more relaxed as you imagine these medieval preservation techniques, so labor-intensive compared to modern methods. But meat preservation was just the beginning of the medieval food storage challenge. Let's talk about dairy products, because medieval cheese making was truly something else entirely. A combination of necessity, tradition, and what we might today call controlled spoilage. When cows were milked, and this happened by hand, obviously, twice a day, every day, regardless of weather or season, the milk started going bad immediately. Fresh milk is an amazing breeding ground for bacteria. And in a world without pasteurization or refrigeration, that bacterial growth started within hours of milking.
In summer, when temperatures were warm, you'd have maybe 2 or 3 hours before the milk began to develop that slightly sour taste that meant it was starting to turn. In winter, if you were lucky and could keep the milk cool, maybe half a day. But that's it. After that, you were dealing with sour milk. And sour milk was a problem that needed a solution. So what did people do with all this rapidly spoiling milk? They turned it into cheese. Not the clean, standardized, scientifically controlled cheese-making process you might imagine, but a chaotic, aromatic, hit-or-miss operation that took place in whatever space was available, using whatever equipment could be assembled. Getting more comfortable now? Settling deeper into your straw mattress as you contemplate this world without refrigeration, where every meal required careful planning and preservation?
And so, as we close the creaking wooden door on this journey through medieval food preservation, take a moment to appreciate just how far we've come. No need to salt slabs of pork for weeks or tend to smoky fires day and night. No need to worry that your milk might curdle before the sun sets or that your winter meat supply might spoil before spring. Tonight, your kitchen is quiet. Your fridge hums softly in the background. Your shelves are lined with sealed jars. Your freezer holds neatly labeled containers. And your pantry is a world of possibility. You live in an age where food security is no longer a daily battle, but a convenience we often forget to marvel at. So as you let yourself drift further into rest, feel a sense of deep comfort settle over you, not just from your blankets and pillows, but from this modern life you inhabit, a life made possible by centuries of trial, error, and human innovation. Sleep well, traveler of time. Tomorrow, your world will still be filled with light switches and refrigerators
and fresh milk waiting patiently in its carton. But tonight, you've wandered the smoky kitchens and chilly cottages of a world long gone and survived to tell the tale. Thank you for spending this evening with me. Until our next story, good night.